welcome to the deep dive. Today, you've given us a pretty interesting piece of source material. A YouTube video, Drugi Zamakna Putina, Jasnowidz Jackowski at Ator Analiza from the wideoprezentacje channel.
Yeah, it's quite a mix.
It really is. Not your usual news breakdown. It jumps all over the place. Earthquake predictions from someone they call a Jasnowidz, which is like a clairvoyant, right?
Yeah, basically.
Then it pivots to Donald Trump, global sanctions, supposed assassination attempts, even this wild theory about the U.S. maybe engineering a global economic crash.
A real whirlwind.
Absolutely, instantly. So our mission really is to unpack these, well, pretty disparate ideas and see what insights we can pull out for you. Should we start with those earthquake predictions?
Sounds good. What's striking right away is how the video credits one of the speakers, Krzysztof Jackowski, this Jasnowidz, for getting past predictions right. Earthquakes in Italy, Poland, Asia.
Yeah, they mentioned that small one in Poland, like a magnitude 2 something, and made a point that non-mining tremors are, well, pretty rare there.
Exactly. And then it moves pretty quickly to a bigger event. One speaker talks about feeling this, like, Wielkie versus oceanic, a huge oceanic shock.
Right, and that lines up with the confirmation of that magnitude 7 quake near Tonga. The video even shows Polish news headlines about it, the tsunami warnings, all that.
So the initial point seems to be that this wasn't just reported after the fact, but potentially anticipated by Jackowski.
What makes it even more intriguing is that he apparently predicted this oceanic one on air. Even put it in his broadcast title, according to the video.
Yeah, that definitely adds a layer, doesn't it? But then, the conversation shifts again towards a future prediction, a hypertreseneni zemi, a hyper-earthquake.
Described as being gushno bardzo gushno, very, very loud, supposedly following the Tonga one.
And this is where the speculation really picks in. They're like, nah, it's not sure if it'll be land or sea.
But they have a feeling, maybe between Japan and the Philippines. Kind of makes you wonder, what's the basis for that, predicting something there after a quake near Tonga?
Well, yeah, it raises questions about seismic connections, potential chains of events, though that's complex geology. And then they throw in another angle.
Oh, yeah.
Theories about earthquakes. They even mention a supposedly serious article on Interia about seismic weapons. The idea you could, artificially cause earthquakes.
Whoa, okay, that's quite a jump. From natural events to, well, let's just say less mainstream ideas.
Definitely a leap. And then, bam, another sharp turn, straight into Donald Trump and global sanctions.
Yeah, the transition is almost abrupt, isn't it? They bring up this translated Al Jazeera piece about Trump threatening global tariffs as sanctions.
Specifically, highlighting Trump being apparently furious with Putin, threatening extra tariffs on anyone, anywhere buying Russian oil.
Okay, so the interesting thing here, for you, the listener, is what kind of levy this is. It's not the usual tariff on U.S. imports.
No, it's taxing, like a German company buying Russian oil or a Brazilian one. Which makes them ask, is this a coup, a customs duty, or more like harach, a tribute, maybe even extortion?
The video speakers clearly lean towards that second interpretation, right? Questioning the whole legality, the implications.
They really don't mince words, calling Trump's potential actions unpredictable, even grab-you robbery. There's this strong feeling he might be more pazerny, more greedy than Putin himself.
It's a very, very critical take. And it wasn't just oil, was it? They also mentioned his comments about maybe forcibly taking Greenland.
Yeah, that came up too. And connecting these dots, the video argues this isn't just like a minor policy shift for Trump. It's fundamental.
How so?
Their analogy is like the police station deciding to become the bandits instead of catching them. Describing Trump as a geopolityczny międzynarodowy bandyta, a geopolitical international bandit.
Wow.
And to show how weird the oil tariff idea is, they use that analogy. Imagine Poland trying to tax companies in Zimbabwe. It really highlights the extraterritorial aspect.
It really does. Okay, so that leads into their analysis of Trump's, well, perceived strategy, especially regarding Russia and global power.
Yeah, the core argument they make is that Trump and his team have basically accepted they've lost a war with Russia.
Now, they clarify, right? Not necessarily direct U.S.-Russia fighting, but losing in terms of influence outcomes.
Yeah.
Especially concerning Ukraine.
Exactly. And they interpret Trump's moves, like pushing for peace talks on what look like Russian terms, as him essentially being a podwykanak, a subcontractor, locking in Russia's gains.
The argument being that even though NATO armed Ukraine, after 3 years, Trump essentially capitulated.
And the explanation offered is that Trump's now trying to change the narrative, change America's image.
Because Russia, a non-fully democratic state, seemingly won America will now act similarly, more self-interested.
That's the idea presented, which, they say, explains the Greenland talk, questioning NATO, these global oil tariffs. It's all part of this new, more assertive posture. They frame it as appearing impulsive, but actually being ego-driven and strategic, a way to shift blame for Ukraine onto Europe.
And from a U.S. citizen's viewpoint, maybe you focus solely on America first. This might seem normal,
Yeah.
justifiable.
The video suggests that, yeah, but for Europe, heavily reliant on NATO, even if they call that reliance an illusion, a zoot, the implications are huge.
Europe is now in a position to be dictated to.
That's the picture painted. Trump projecting America as this pecorum pachorum, like a brat, a rascal, similar to how they might view Russia or China, willing to throw its weight around.
And this links to the BRICS currency potentially challenging the dollar.
Yeah.
Soon.
Yeah, they mentioned maybe even this quarter, which in their view gives Trump a very narrow window to try and set up this new world order he envisions.
And the conclusion they draw from that is pretty bleak for Europe.
Extremely.
Yeah.
That Trump might basically sacrifice Europe, turn it into a vassal state through what they call nowoczesna kolonizacja, modern colonization.
So countries keep their governments, but pay a high price, like a tribute, for security. A modern harash.
That's the grim scenario laid out in the video. Okay, moving on, topic 4. This reported letter from Trump to Iran.
Yes. The Iranian Ayatollah supposedly revealed he got a letter from Trump maybe 20-something days before the YouTube recording.
And the contents, as described in the video, pretty stark. An ultimatum.
Comply with demands, disarm, stop threatening Israel or Iran, ceases to exist within 60 days.
Given the timing mentioned, that deadline would fall around late May, early June.
And the video predicts the Ayatollah refuses, leading to potential war by late June.
That's the prediction they make based on this alleged letter. Very direct, potentially explosive stuff.
Definitely. Okay, shifting gears again. Topic 5. This alleged assassination attempt on Putin.
Yeah, quite dramatic. Unconfirmed, of course. But the video reports a bomb near the FSB headquarters damaged one of Putin's limousines.
They seem sure it was his limo, and the timing suggested it went off too early.
That's what they claim, which naturally leads them to speculate who was behind it.
They mentioned Russian oligarchs wanting him gone.
That was one possibility floated. The other, maybe more surprising, was China.
China. Why?
Well, the implication or the speculation in the video was that if China did it, maybe it suggests Putin is secretly cooperating with Trump. It's quite a connection to make.
It sounds like a big leap, yeah.
Yeah.
Even the speaker seemed to acknowledge that. But it shows the level of conjecture around something like this.
Absolutely. And then they predict another threat to Putin.
Yeah, something connected to a school,
Yeah.
or near a school building, a university,
Mm-hmm.
involving ortonic, a guard or sentry.
But not necessarily close protection.
Apparently not, but just a guard. It's a weirdly specific detail for a prediction, isn't it?
It really is. Adds a strange element. Okay, so now, maybe the biggest, most complex topic. This idea of a global economic crash, potentially orchestrated by the U.S.
Right, this is where it gets really theoretical and, frankly, a bit alarming. The video suggests Putin knows about a Strasny crash, a terror crash, that America is supposedly planning.
The argument being the U.S. can still trigger something huge while the dollar is dominant.
They point to recent big drops on Wall Street, apparently linked to Trump's statements, even though he seems to dismiss the stock market publicly for longer-term goals.
And then comes the hypothetical. Trump tells Putin about the crash beforehand. Putin uses this knowledge to benefit Russia.
The logic being, if you know it's coming, you can protect yourself, maybe even profit.
Yeah, but then the analysis gets darker. If the U.S. is engineering the crash, maybe traditional shorting is too risky. Banks could fail everywhere.
So a massive global bankruptcy creates opportunities,
Yeah.
but only for those with alternative systems ready.
That's the theory, that the U.S., seeing the dollar might be weakening long-term, needs to create a new kind of wire Willoughby, faith in something new, a super dollar, maybe a blue dollar.
To maintain global financial control.
Exactly. And this new system would need backing by something the U.S. has plenty of, which could make crisis-hit nations dependent on U.S. aid.
Leading to deliberate impoverishment elsewhere to maintain control.
That's the concerning implication discussed. They even mention this idea of a new obywatelska postawa, a civic attitude, where people accept a lower standard of living.
A big shift from the siat comfortu, the world of comfort many are used to.
They briefly dismiss direct nuclear war between major powers, mutually assured destruction, But they wonder about countries like Iran. If they got nukes, maybe they'd act differently.
So the core idea is the U.S. sees the indirect war with Russia via Ukraine isn't working out strategically.
So they pivot, shift tactics to defend the dollar's standing in a new world order.
By triggering a crisis, then offering the solution, possibly involving crypto.
Yeah, they note Trump's slightly warmer recent comments on crypto, Elon Musk's support, suggesting it could become a nowoczesna piramida finansowa, a modern financial pyramid that gains global acceptance.
Wow. And how would this affect China, according to the video?
Hugely impacted. Their export-driven model relies on the current global order, but China is also developing its own digital currency, trying to move away from the dollar.
So there's a conflict. The U.S. wants a managed crash, but China might prefer a U.S. collapse to boost its own dominance.
That's the tension they describe, pointing out China slowly selling off U.S. debt.
They also mentioned someone called King, proposing a multi-currency reserve system.
Yeah, the argument being competition between currencies forces better policies. The dollar's unchallenged run maybe led to less accountability.
They give some history, dollar rising after WWII, Cold War. But now Asia leads in tech population.
Right, which leads back to, is it really in China's long-term interest to prop up the dollar with its debt holdings?
Or better to focus on its own growth, its own currency's future. Maybe let the dollar weaken, even take some short-term losses.
The video leans towards that. China strategically dismantling U.S. financial dominance.
It contrasts the U.S. needing to create a new belief system versus China's tangible economic power. Nations losing faith in the dollar might turn to China, not some new U.S. invention.
That's a key point they make. And to show a slowdown might already be happening, they use that Polish real estate example.
Lots of listings, few buyers, big price drops from asking to actual sale price, like that 40% difference case.
Suggesting people are getting cautious, maybe sensing something's coming.
So how might the world react if the U.S. did try to engineer a crash?
Well, the U.S. has military might, but other nations wouldn't just passively accept it, especially those heavily invested in the dollar. They might prepare responses. But China's independent path and tech advancements position it well to potentially come out on top. They revisit King's peace ideas, UN reform, multiple reserve currencies.
Breaking the dollar monopoly.
Contrasting China's patient long-game strategy with Russia's situation.
Russia having resources, but lagging in tech mostly. Putin might see short-term benefits in deals with Trump.
That's the suggestion. But ultimately, the video stresses. This is all speculation, predictions.
And the advice is, be careful with your savings, given the potential for major upheaval.
Pretty much. Caution is advised.
It's really quite something. How this one video ties together earthquakes, geopolitics, potential economic collapse. It paints a very interconnected, maybe unstable picture.
It really does. This deep dive showed a complex web, didn't it? Natural events, political maneuvering, economic threats. All linked in this one source. Highlights how tangled things can be.
So, for you, the listener, lots to chew on here. What connections do you see? What stands out as most significant? What questions does this raise for you about, well, everything? Global relations, the economy?
Yeah, it's definitely a lot of uncertainty out there, but staying informed, thinking critically about what you hear, seems more important than ever, right?
Absolutely. Well, thanks for joining us on this pretty intense deep dive. Some really surprising, thought-provoking stuff.
Indeed.
The future's unwritten, obviously, but maybe this exploration gave you some new angles to consider as you watch things unfold.